First Peter. And look at let's start with verse 13, chapter 1. Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lust in your ignorance, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. Let's hold your place there, and let's go back to the book of Leviticus a minute. And we'll go to chapter 11. This is kind of a repeat, I guess, but we'll just look at it. Verse 44. The Lord, of course, talking to the Levitical priesthood, but to the people as well. And he says, for I am the Lord your God, ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, ye shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall ye defile yourself with any manner of creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. I want to talk a little bit tonight about this subject in verse 15. But as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy. The usual response to that verse is, well, nobody can be holy. And if that's your response, it's because of probably a couple things. Number one, you don't want to. Number two, you just don't think God knows what he's talking about. Either one of those things will get you in a lot of trouble. Most of us here tonight were raised in a humanistic environment. Situation ethics was the slant. Depending on the situation as to how you handled what you did. And so we find holiness an impossibility simply because it demands no more Adamic freedom but controlled by the Spirit of God. And holiness for a lot of people is an outward thing, but holiness for God is an inward thing. And it's the inward thing that comes outward. So no matter what you do to the outside, you don't become holy because you wear certain clothes or wear a certain pair of shoes or you don't wear any lipstick or whatever it is that you think makes people holy. It is something that God does inside of you. A.W. Tozer said, holiness is taught in the Scripture, is not based upon knowledge on our part. Rather, it's based upon the resurrected Christ indwelling us and changing us into his likeness. So holiness demands a change. And that change is in us from an inward perspective to an outward perspective. You don't become holy when you get saved. You have the Holy Spirit residing inside of you, but you don't become holy until you recognize that you're not holy. A.B. Simpson, the old Baptist preacher, said, holiness of heart and life, this is not the perfection of the human nature, but the holiness of the divine nature dwelling within us. You always notice there's emphasis by these people to make sure that you understand it's not an outward thing. Does it become outward? Yes. But it starts on the inside. It doesn't start on the outside. When you get saved, there's a lot of things in you that won't change for a while. They ought to, but they won't. Because that's the old man demanding that he still have the privileges that he had before. And then you have to train him that he doesn't have that right anymore. He doesn't own you. Oswald J. Chambers said, holiness, not happiness, is the chief end of man. Holiness, not happiness. But what is the aim of the world you live in? Be happy. Have what you want. Do what you want. Go where you want. Feel like you want. Be whatever gender you want. Charles Spurgeon said, if you think you can walk in holiness without keeping up perpetual fellowship with Christ, you have made a great mistake. If you would be holy, you must live close to Jesus. So there's a demand in holiness that we're not first. The Lord's first. And we're holy not because of what we are, we're holy because of what He is. He said, be ye holy, for I am holy. So it's about God, not about you. And when we make the emphasis of holiness on ourselves, we become unholy. Because you, in your Adamic nature, you as a sinful person, you can't measure up to Jesus Christ. There's no measurement there for you. Let's consider here tonight a clarification of holiness. Holiness needs a definition. Whatever God is, for the simple sense of definition, that's holiness. If we said whatever God is holy, we would be close to the definition. You see, I don't understand holiness probably more than anybody else. We look at the Old Testament, and particularly the book of Leviticus, which dealt with the priesthood, and we see all that priest went through, all the things he had to do to cleanse himself. And you remember in there, boy, if they touched any dead thing, they were unclean. If they did this, they were unclean. And so holiness in the Old Testament was what God wanted his people to be. But the one thing that they sought after was the opposite of that. They tried to be holy, and you remember the little incident that happened when Moses went up on the mountain and to get the Ten Commandments, and while he was up there, Aaron sold the church out to a rock band. And they had a little concert down there. When he got down there, Moses did, they were all dancing naked. They try to fashion a God and then worship that God. And when you try to fashion yourself after something else other than God, you're not going to be holy. It ain't going to come out right. Holiness can be defined as complete conformity in all things great and small to the holy will of God. That is, being a one mind with God in judgment of mind and heart, and agreeing with God in His estimation of things. It's not, well, I should say this way. It has a root word, and the root words are whole, healthy, and perfect. That's where the word comes from. So when we're talking about holiness, we're talking about something that's changed inside of you. You don't view things like you viewed them before. You don't think like you thought before. You don't carry on like you carried on before. Holiness is a change of character on the inside. It's the creature that new man that you got, and he has to, as Paul said, work out. And that's why things change.
What are those three things?
Whole, healthy, and perfect. So if we're holy, there's something that's changed about us. People get scared. They say, well, if I'm holy, people will think I'm weird. Well, they probably think you're weird anyways. And most Christians are weird to the world. A real Bible-believing saint doesn't see the world in the same eye as the world sees itself. That's why we have such a condemnation from the world, because we don't see it. See, holiness, if you go back there again to Leviticus and go through that, and even here in Peter, you see there's a sanctified, there's a sanctification, there's a setting apart. So holiness demands that we set apart something. And that something is ourself. We set ourself apart for God's use. You know, you got to remember something. Being used of God doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. As a matter of fact, most likely it won't be. In verse 14 here in Peter, he said, as obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lust in your ignorance. There's a condition or a prerequisite, if you want to call it that, to holiness. It's called obedience. And where most Christians fail is they won't be obedient. If you said, well, God says that we need to do this, well, I don't want to do that. You're kind of a child in your attitude toward God and His holiness. Not fashioning ourselves after the world. How much more clear could it be than that? That what we're supposed to be as a Christian is not like the world. We're supposed to be unlike the world. We're supposed to be opposite. Whatever the world is, we're the opposite of it. And the shame of it is that most Christians don't get that. It's called obedience, not fashioning yourselves, not a fashion. Everybody knows what fashion is. I don't have to tell you what fashion is. You know what fashion is. It means you look like something. You can't love the world. Look at Romans 12. Hold your place there in Peter, but look at Romans 12. You can't love the world. Paul says, you know the verses well, but look at verse 1. Let's read it. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, some of you might say, well, that's what you think. It's not matter what I think. It's a matter what it says. Thinking, it doesn't matter here. When you're not to fashion yourself after something, you're not to look like something. You're not supposed to look like something you're not. That's called hypocrisy. That's called acting in Hollywood. Hollywood is full of people who are nothing more than hypocrites. They're pretending to be somebody they're not. They're pretending to do something they don't do. And when you imitate the world and look like the world, then you can't be a testimony for God. Well, you got His word on it. You don't have to take mine. Notice Peter put it this way. He said, not fashioning yourself according to the former lust. Lust is the key to sin. Look over here in James a minute, chapter 1. James chapter 1. Verse 14, chapter 1, James. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lusts and enticed. And when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. So you got God's word on it. It's a hard trail to walk, friend. There's nothing easy about living a holy life, being holy. There's nothing easy about being a Christian. If somebody gave you that idea, they're lying to you. None of the apostles and none of the disciples had an easy life. The Apostle Paul didn't have an easy life. You say, why? Because when you act like God and you try to live a life that should be, you're going to be contrary to the world. And that's what you're supposed to be, contrary to the world. You're not supposed to be going along with it. Any dead fish can float downstream. It takes some life to float up a stream. So what you're supposed to do as a Christian, you're supposed to get your life changed. And that takes a little bit here and a little bit there. It don't happen overnight. Nobody likes to think that they're bad. You're worse than bad. In verse 15, Peter goes on to say, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation. Now we know the word conversation can mean a couple things. It can mean the exchange of words between people, or it can mean how you live. Paul talked about it in Philippians, that where our conversation was in heaven, where we live, where we are. So your conversation, he said here in verse 15, he said, but as he which hath called you is holy, as he. Look over here to 2 Peter. I'll show you how this thing works. 2 Peter 2. Let me just show you so you see it. And look at verse 6. We'll just start there. Chapter 2, verse 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemning them with an overthrow, making them ensamples unto those that that after should live ungodly. So what was Sodom and Gomorrah? An example of what's going to happen to those who live ungodly. All right? Verse 7. And delivered Lot, watch this now, vexed with the filthy what? See how that works? If you won't be affected by the Holy Spirit of God so you can live a holy life for Him, you will be affected by the wickedness of this world and you'll live like that. You say, well, I'd never do that. Well, there's probably about 100 other people in this area that said that one time. You will do what your flesh tells you to do. You're not in charge of your life. You think you are. The devil's in charge of your life. You say, how do you know that? Jesus told the Pharisees, you are of your father the devil. He was a liar from the beginning. So you either following God or you're going to be following the other God with the small g. You haven't got a choice. That's exactly how it is in this life, this world. Holiness is not based on a church. It's not based on some member that you know. It's not based on the preacher. It's not based on some creed or some set of rules. If I do these 10 things, I'll be holy. So, in order to attempt to live holy, I must do that which pleases God. Let's go back here a minute. Verse 15. So we get this straight so that you understand. But as, okay, just keep that in your mind. But as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy. He didn't say be like him. He said as he is. The only way you're like Christ is that he lives in you. In this flesh, you'll never be like him. You got to get rid of this flesh to be like him. Say, how do you know that? Because John said we don't know what we'll be like, but we know we'll be like him. So when we're going through this life on this earth here, is what we're trying to do. We're trying to live a life that exemplifies the Lord Jesus Christ. Doesn't make us little Christ. We don't run around like that. And it doesn't make us special spiritual people that we're just above everybody else. We need our own pew. We sit there. It simply means that as we go through every day, we're trying to do is what we can to please him. As he is holy, so you're supposed to be. Not like him, but as he is. That holiness that he, in John 17, talked about that he had with his Father before the beginning of the foundation of the earth. See, what you don't know is that one of these days, according to 1 John and according to Paul in Philippians, what you don't know is one of these days you're going to get a new body and it'll be like his body, and you won't sin anymore and you won't have to worry about holiness anymore. You're going to be different, see? What are you doing on this earth? Right now you're trying to do your best to live for him and to be like him so that other people that see you and hear you and talk with you know there's something about you that's different from everybody else. Jesus never had a problem of being different wherever he went. That was identifiable. They knew who he was. We live in this age anymore where nobody wants to be like they should be. They just want to be like everybody else. In verse 15 and 16, he says this. He says, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because, how you like that word? Because. Have you ever said that? When your children said that? If you haven't said it yet, bud, it's going to come your way there. Your little boy's going to say, well, how come, Daddy? Because. You don't have to say any more, just because. And if you have to say anything more, because I said so. That's how that thing goes. You say, well, why are we supposed to do this? Because it's written. It's written. It's not what the preacher's saying. It's not about what I'm saying. It's not about what I'm preaching. It's about what he said. Don't you understand that when a preacher delivers a sermon, he should deliver what God said, not what he thinks? So he said this, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. And what he's doing, he's taking you back there to that Old Testament, Leviticus 16, verse 44, and he's bringing it up here and putting it out in the church and saying, you know, being holy, I said so because I said so. Well, I don't have to live holy to go to heaven. No, you probably don't have to live holy to go to heaven, but when you get there, you'll wish you would have. If you remember right, when we read Leviticus 11, there's the idea of sanctification or being set apart. And the reason why is because that's connected to holiness. Do you realize that the Levitical priests were set apart from Israel? They were their own tribe. They were their own people. They were set apart from God's people. Why? Because they had a duty, and that duty was to go into the Holy of Holies and the holy place once a year. The high priest went in there. That was their duty. And they were, when God created that Levite tribe, they became the ones who, if you remember right, the firstborn of every creature, whether it was an ass, a colt, or whatever it was, belonged to God. And God took the priest as his in place of that firstborn. So you and I are supposed to do this. We're supposed to set ourselves apart for his service. That doesn't mean everybody's a missionary. It doesn't mean everybody's a preacher. It doesn't mean everybody's whatever. It means that you are personally set apart to be for God what he wants you to be. Now that'll take some work. It'll take you some years. You're not going to do that overnight. We're to be holy. Let's look at 1 Corinthians a minute, chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. This is not a fun subject, nor is it an easy subject, but it's a necessary subject. As a matter of fact, if you would have been living 100 years ago, most of the preachers that you would have known preached sermons on holiness quite a bit. And again, it was an overwork of the thing, and I don't mean to speak ill of any of them. Thank God, I would wish I was half the man that some of them were. But it began to be that you wore this and you did that and you went here and you didn't go here and you took that, and people began to feel that was their holiness. And sure, maybe some of that worked out, maybe some of that should have been done, but then it become a various thing as what color you wore and what color you didn't wear and how long should it be and how short should it be and What was your hair supposed to be in a bun, or is it supposed to hang down? And all that stuff, which wasn't bad if it was done right, became holiness. But it wasn't. Why? Because that's all man-made. If you're holy, then you're going to want to please God. You're going to want to look right. You're going to want to smell right. You're going to want to talk right. That comes from the inside out. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16, just so you get the point. Know ye not that you're the temple of God? How many of you think God would live in a dirty temple? Know ye not that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? Now watch it. Here's a warning. There was some advice. Now here's the warning. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. I didn't write it. I just read it. I didn't write it. That's not my words. I didn't say it. Don't go out of here and say, well, here's what the preacher said. No, look at here what God said. He said, your body is my temple. If you defile that body, I'll destroy you. That's pretty strong, I think. Maybe it's the reason why so many Christians spend so much time sick. You say, well, I don't know about that. Well, did you ever read 1 Corinthians chapter 11, or are you just assuming that you don't know? Maybe you should do a little bit more reading and studying and find out that God expects us to be the right kind of a person. And He's telling us how to live and telling us what kind of life we're supposed to live. People say, well, nobody can do that. Okay. You think God's a liar then? Well, so no, I don't think God's a liar. Well, that's what you just said. You just said nobody can do that when God said you could. So you got to make your mind up. Either you believe that God's telling the truth, or you believe that God may be pulling your leg. You say, well, that's awful hateful. No, it ain't. It's just required. So He says, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. In all manner of conversation. In all manner of conversation at the end of verse 15. In all manner of conversation. However I live, whatever I do, it's supposed to speak of holiness. Maybe some of you don't think this is serious. I don't know. Maybe you don't think you should take it serious. I have no clue there either. But I want to tell you something right now. God took it serious. Amen. And if you don't believe that, go back and read some of the Old Testament and what God did when His people decided they weren't going to. And I don't know that living in this age is any different. Maybe we just don't see it in the same manner. All these things were written for our admonition. All these things written for our learning. That's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10. We're guilty of having a walk not backed by our talk. First Thessalonians 2. Notice what the Apostle Paul writes here to this Thessalonian church. 1 Thessalonians 2, and look at verse 10. Oops, wrong book. Sorry about that. Paul said, ye are witnesses, verse 10, chapter 2. Ye are witnesses, and God also, watch now, how holy and justly and unblameable we have behaved ourselves among you that believe. Can't do it or don't want to do it. That's pretty tough stuff. I'm not telling you I got it down. I'm just telling you it's pretty tough stuff. Paul warns the Christians in Ephesians chapter 5. We don't have time to get it there, but if you go verses 1 through 18, you'll see what Paul talks about, how a Christian's supposed to live, and how he's supposed to walk, and how he's supposed to talk, how he's supposed to think. You know what it is? See, we live in America, and the thing that we don't like is we don't like somebody telling us what to do. If the last year hasn't told you that and taught you that lesson, you didn't learn anything. We don't like to be told what to do. Why? Because we're free, and we don't want anybody telling us where to wear a mask, where not to wear a mask, and what not to do, and what not to eat, and what not to drink, and where not to go, and what we don't want anybody telling us that. And so we've taken that attitude and transferred it over here to the Bible and to God and said, Lord, don't you tell me what to do. So I don't think it's that bad. Well, pay attention. Maybe you'll see it is that bad. Maybe you'll see there's a lot of Christians, and they go to good churches. They just don't want to be told what to do. The question is not should we or how can we, but here's the question: why don't we? Turn over to Romans 6 a minute. Why don't we? You know, I can recall as a boy, maybe my sons can too, I'm not sure, but I can recall as a boy my dad saying sometimes, why didn't you do that? Or why did you do that? And his question was in the form, when he formed the question, when he's asking to me, he's asking me in response to the fact that he had already told me what to do or what not to do, and I had refused either which way it was I was going to do or not to do. And his question to me was, why? Knowing what was going to happen if you didn't do this, why would you choose to do that? Why would you choose to get a whipping when you don't have to get one if you just done what I told you? Why do you choose to get punished for something you wouldn't have got punished for if you would have just not done it? And what makes us think that someday we're going to stand before God and give an account of ourselves and have to face the consequences of not doing what God said to do because we just didn't agree with it or we didn't like it? So it's not a question of should we or how can we, but why don't we? And here he said in Romans chapter 6, in verse 22, but now being made free from sin and become servants to God, ye have your fruit unto holiness. See it? Right there it is. And the end, everlasting life. God has not told us to do something impossible. It's just a matter of deciding whether we will obey. 2 Corinthians. We're just about done here. You can breathe again. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh. Oh, my goodness, that can't say what I'm thinking it says. Perfecting holiness. How? Why did I do things the way I did as a boy? Because I feared what my dad was going to do if I didn't. It's that simple. I wasn't afraid of him like go hide in the corner, but I feared what he told me not to do or to do, and if I didn't, I knew the consequences. And we as saints of God know this. We know what God's told us to do, and if we choose not to do it, it's your choice. Go ahead, do that. But there is a consequence to pay for that. First Thessalonians. My goodness, there's so much in this book. A lot of it is skipped by people because they don't want to hear it. You're supposed to make people feel good, and somehow or another I wasn't given that ability. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 7. For God hath not, so that means he didn't choose to do that, right? For God hath not called us unto what? But to what? See? Again, it's not a matter of what I said. It's not a matter of whether you want to do or not. That's what you've been called to do. You say holiness is a calling? You just read it. It's what every Christian ought to want to do in their life, is be changed so much so that they become as he is holy. Not like him, but as he is holy. That things in life that ought to matter will matter, and things that ought not to matter will be secondary. See, most Christians living in this age right now can't make their mind up what's first. To most of them, God isn't first. To most of them, the church isn't first. And that's not to say that I am or you are better than they are because they've made that choice. It's simply saying it's a hard thing to make that choice. And that's why everybody has a hard time being holy in their life, because that's a choice you have to make. That means there's some change in your life. There's what you talk to and what you listen to and what you read and where you go and all the things you say. Some of those things have to be done away with because they take away the holiness of God in your life. And keep in mind that holiness is something that happens on the inside of you, not on the outside. All the outside will change if the inside's right, but if the inside's wrong, nothing matters on the outside. And that's why some Christians are hard to tell what they are, because there's nothing on the outside that indicates there is a change on the inside. I don't know if you knew George Whitefield, but he was an old-timer from way back. He said, "It is an undoubted truth that every doctrine that comes from God leads to God, and that which doth not tend to promote holiness," listen, "is not of God." Matthew Henry wrote a set of commentaries, was a good preacher, said, "No attribute of God is more dreadful to sinners than his holiness." The world hates anything. They don't want you to tell them how they got to live, what they got to do. Boy, they don't like that. They don't mind telling you. They just don't want you telling them. David Brainerd, who was a missionary to the American Indians, said this: "Thirsting desires and longings possessed my soul after perfect holiness. God was so precious to my soul that the world with all of its enjoyments appeared vile. I had no value for the favor of men than for pebbles." When you can get to the point in your life where you really don't care what men think about you, you're probably going to start doing some changing in your life. Your life will become more useful for God. But if you're constantly worried about what everybody's going to say about you, what they think about you amounts to, as he said, pebbles. Holiness is something that's missing in the age we live in. But it is God's desire that we be holy people. Father, thank you for these few who have ventured out tonight, and trust they got something that'll help them. Lord, I don't have this down, nailed to the floor. I don't have all the answers to it, but I believe what I read, and I know that you want us to be holy. You want us to be clean. You want us to be pure. That's all. That's what your desire for us is. And Lord, would we not want to be like that? And I believe most people do. It's just a hard concept to get to, because we think we own ourselves when we found out we're the temple of God. He has bought us with a price, and we're supposed to glorify him. It's not about us. It's about you. It always has been about you. It never has been about anybody else. Bless these folks as they'll go their way. Give